Killing a foreign head of state is illegal under U.S. law. Ronald Reagan signed that law in 1981. Yet on Saturday morning, 28th of February, 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces killed Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and the White House didn't call it a violation. They called it self-defense. They claimed that Iran had been plotting to kill Donald Trump, and he got there first. That gap between what the law says and what Washington is claiming is exactly where this story lives. Hey, welcome back to World Powers Fusion. Let's scrutinize the self-defense argument coming out of Washington. This argument rests on two pillars. First, that Iran was approximately 1 week away from producing a nuclear-capable missile that could reach American shores. Second, that Iranian operatives had been actively plotting the assassination of a sitting U.S. president. At the United Nations Security Council, U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz framed the strikes as lawful and essential, describing Iran as responsible for what he called an unending campaign of bloodshed, and stating plainly that Iran had attempted to assassinate the President of the United States. That is an extraordinary claim, and it is worth examining what we actually know about it. There were reports as far back as 2024, around the time of the first assassination attempt on Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, that Iranian intelligence had been exploring plots against him. The U.S. Justice Department had previously brought charges related to alleged Iranian-linked assassination planning, which Iran denied. Trump himself, in a phone call with ABC's Jonathan Karl following the strikes, was characteristically direct. He said of Khamenei, "I got him before he got me. They tried twice. I got him first." That is the president's stated justification in his own words. But here is where it gets complicated. There is, as of now, no publicly released intelligence confirming that an active, imminent Iranian assassination plot against Trump was in its final stages. Also, Republican Senator Ted Cruz, not a critic of this administration, said publicly that he had no indication Iran was anywhere close to getting nuclear weapons since the U.S. bombed their facilities last year. That matters. When members of the president's own party are raising questions about the intelligence basis for a military operation that killed a head of state, those questions cannot simply be dismissed. There is also the nuclear dimension of the self-defense argument to examine. Retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell, a former fighter pilot and military analyst, put it plainly: Iran had been proven to possess highly enriched uranium well beyond any civilian program requirement. The logical conclusion, he said, was that their ambition to acquire a nuclear weapon never went away. That is a credible position. Iran's behavior across years of negotiations supports it. After 5 rounds of talks in May of last year, a 6th round was scheduled and then canceled, after which Operation Midnight Hammer took place. Now, fresh rounds of talks were again underway when the strikes began. Iranian officials had refused throughout to put their ballistic missile stockpile on the negotiating table, limiting discussions exclusively to nuclear enrichment. From Washington's perspective, the pattern was clear. Iran was running out the clock. The nuclear case for military action is therefore stronger than the assassination case, at least based on what is publicly available. But it still does not resolve the fundamental legal question. The United States did not go to the United Nations before striking Iran. It did not seek authorization under international law. It did not formally invoke Article 51 of the UN Charter, which permits the use of force in genuine self-defense against an imminent armed attack. What it did instead was present its justification, after the fact, at an Emergency Security Council session held after Khamenei was already dead. Sean Bell made an observation about this that cuts to the heart of the matter. When a government bypasses international legal frameworks before acting and then attempts to construct a justification afterward, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between a genuine self-defense claim and a narrative built to legitimize a decision that had already been made. Iran's ambassador to the UN rejected every charge as baseless, calling the strikes war crimes that killed and injured hundreds of Iranian civilians. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged all sides to step back from the brink, warning that continued military action risked triggering a wider conflict. Neither of those responses changes the facts on the ground, but they do reflect the degree to which Washington's legal argument has failed to persuade much of the international community. Now, what about the operational picture? Because that tells us something too. Notably, the fatal strikes on Iran on the 28th of February did not begin at 2 or 3 in the morning, as military doctrine would typically dictate for a Shahkanda campaign. They began at roughly 9:30 in the morning, local time in Tehran. Sean Bell flagged this as significant. The reason, he believes, is that Israeli intelligence, which has demonstrated extraordinary penetration of Iranian and Hezbollah networks, as evidenced by the pager operation against Hezbollah leadership, had identified the precise location of Khamenei and senior Iranian officials at a leadership compound in central Tehran that Saturday morning. The CIA confirmed the location. Israel dispatched jets immediately. The window was open and they took it. That is not the behavior of a government acting impulsively or emotionally. It is the behavior of a government that had been planning this operation for a considerable period and moved when the intelligence gave them their best opportunity. The New York Times reported that the U.S. and Israel had been tracking Iranian leadership for months before the strikes. This was not a decision made overnight, which brings us back to the central question. Was it self-defense? The honest answer is, it depends on which part of the justification you are evaluating and what standard of evidence you apply. On the assassination plot, the claim that Khamenei was killed before he could kill Trump, the public evidence is thin. There is a documented history of Iranian plotting against U.S. officials, and intelligence agencies on both sides have been playing this game for years. But a history of threats is not the same as an imminent, actionable plot. No specific evidence of an active operational plan against Trump has been declassified or publicly presented. Until it is, that particular justification remains at best unverified. On the nuclear threat, the argument that Iran was dangerously close to a weapons-grade capability and that diplomacy had definitively failed the case is considerably stronger, even if the specific one-week timeline cannot be independently confirmed. Years of enrichment beyond civilian requirements, a consistent pattern of using negotiations as a delay tactic, and deep intelligence suggesting Iran viewed a nuclear weapon as the only true guarantee of its security. All of that supports the view that the threat was real and growing. What neither argument fully addresses is the absence of a plan for what comes next. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, a force of roughly 290,000 personnel, has not surrendered. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. The comparison to what followed the fall of Saddam Hussein is one that military and foreign policy professionals are already making, and it is not a reassuring one. The Strait of Hormuz remains a pressure point. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. Oil prices are already rising. And as Sean Bell noted, Iran almost certainly possesses more ballistic missiles than the U.S. currently has defensive missiles to intercept them. Which means the longer this continues, the more the risk calculus shifts. There is also the broader question of what this moment signals to the rest of the world. If the most powerful nation on Earth conducts military operations without UN authorization, without a formal legal basis under international law, and without congressional approval under the War Powers Act, and faces no meaningful consequence, the message received in Beijing, Moscow, and other capitals is not a reassuring one. So here is where things stand. Trump's self-defense claim has 2 components. The assassination plot component lacks public evidence sufficient to meet the legal threshold for preemptive self-defense under international law. The nuclear threat component, on the other hand, has a stronger factual foundation, though this has been contradicted by some members of the president's party, like Senator Ted Cruz, who maintain there were no indications Iran was anywhere close to getting nuclear weapons since the U.S. bombed their facilities last year. What is clear right now is that this operation was meticulously planned, executed with precision, and achieved its immediate military objectives. What is far less clear is whether it was legal under any recognized international framework, whether the intelligence fully justified the specific timing, and whether the United States has a serious plan for what Iran becomes now. Those are not partisan questions. They are the questions that anyone watching this situation honestly, regardless of where they stand politically, has an obligation to ask. Subscribe and turn on notifications.